After my dad's sudden death, I became owner of his luxury hotel chain. A guest complained, "Get me someone who actually runs this place." I said, "You're looking at her." His wife whispered, "She's the one from Forbes." His jaw dropped. I had always known that my father, Victor Calloway, was someone important. He wasn't just another businessman. He had built an empire, a luxury hotel chain that stretched from New York to Miami, Los Angeles, and even a few spots abroad. But as much as I knew about the business, I never knew him as a father. He was always too busy, too focused on his hotels and meetings to really be present in my life. When he died suddenly, the news didn't hit me like a wave. Instead, it was more like a dull thud. I hadn't spoken to him in years, ever since he and my mother divorced. My mom, Tessa, had remarried shortly after, and we had moved to the other side of the country. Our relationship had always been distant, filled with resentment on both sides. I couldn't blame him for not being there when I needed him, but it didn't make his death easier to process. When the lawyers called me that morning, I wasn't prepared for what they said. Victor Calloway's estate, including the entirety of his luxury hotel chain, is now in your hands. I was his only child, and there were no other heirs. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it. I had a business degree, sure, but I'd never been involved in the day-to-day operations of a hotel. I was a city girl who preferred small boutique cafes, not penthouses overlooking city skylines or five-star dining experiences. Yet now, I found myself standing in the grand lobby of Calloway Plaza in Manhattan, staring up at the gleaming chandeliers that hung above me, trying to figure out where to even start. I'd been here only a couple of days, and it already felt like I was walking into a world where everyone could see I didn't belong. The staff was polite but distant, their smiles strained whenever I walked past them. Samuel, the hotel manager, was one of the first people I met. He had been with my father for over 20 years, and he was already sizing me up, probably wondering how long I'd last. "Miss Calloway," Samuel said one afternoon, his voice respectful but edged with skepticism, "I trust you'll find the transition smooth. But I'll be here if you need assistance. This is a large operation, and it's—" "I know," I interrupted, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I'll figure it out." But every meeting, every decision I had to make, felt like I was walking a tightrope. The more I tried to prove myself, the more I felt the weight of the company bearing down on me. The employees whispered in corners, and Samuel would give me side-eye looks that told me he didn't believe I had what it took. Still, I pushed forward. After all, I had no other choice. This hotel chain was my inheritance, my father's legacy, and I couldn't afford to let it slip away. But I didn't know where to start. My father's business practices were a mystery to me. The financials didn't add up, and the decisions he made about the company's future were unclear at best. Then came the night that would change everything. It was a typical Friday evening. The hotel was bustling with guests from all over the world. Celebrities, businessmen, influencers, everyone in this place was either rich or famous, and they carried themselves as if they owned the world. I was still getting the hang of things, walking around the hotel floor trying to get familiar with operations when I overheard a guest at the front desk. His voice was loud, demanding, and I could hear the frustration in every word. "I want to speak to someone who actually runs this place. Get me someone competent." The receptionist looked up at me, panic in his eyes. He was still new and hadn't yet adjusted to the fact that I was now in charge. I could tell he was scared. He looked at the guest and then at me, silently asking what he should do. I stood up straighter and walked over to the desk. The guest was a tall man, wearing an expensive suit and holding a glass of champagne. His jaw was clenched and his eyes were cold. His wife stood beside him, looking at me curiously. "You're looking at her," I said, trying my best to sound calm. There was a brief silence. The man's eyes widened, his eyebrows furrowing. "What?" he asked, confused. "I'm the one who runs this place now," I said, maintaining eye contact. "Is there a problem?" The man seemed to hesitate, his lips twisting into a tight smile. But before he could respond, his wife leaned in and whispered something in his ear. I caught a few words, something about Forbes and the air, and that was when I saw it, the shock on his face. "Wait," he said, staring at me as if he was seeing me for the first time. "You're the one from Forbes, the one who inherited the hotel empire." I didn't say anything. I just nodded, trying not to let the awkwardness of the situation make me uncomfortable. The man's expression shifted from irritation to something that looked almost like admiration, though it was hard to tell if it was genuine. "Well then," he said, his tone softening. "I'm sure you'll take care of things then." His wife was still eyeing me, and I caught her whispering again. "I didn't know you were the heir." I couldn't help but feel a little smug. After all, most people didn't expect a woman, especially someone with no experience, to be running a business like this. I had spent years avoiding my father's shadow, but here I was, living it. And yet, as much as I wanted to bask in the moment, I knew this wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The next few weeks were a blur of chaotic decisions. It was like I had been thrown into a pressure cooker, and everything was boiling over. Samuel continued to doubt my ability to run the hotel, and the senior management team wasn't any better. They were polite on the surface, but undermined every decision I made. They questioned my authority at every turn, almost as if they were waiting for me to fail. I remember one afternoon, in one of the high-rise conference rooms, where I was meeting with the top executives. I had presented a plan to update the hotel's interior to make it more modern, something my father had never considered, and the room went silent. It wasn't a bad idea, but the resistance was palpable. "It's a lot of work, Miss Calloway," one of the senior members said, adjusting his glasses. "And frankly, it's unnecessary. The guests who stay here are accustomed to the traditional luxury. Changing the look could alienate them." I was so tired of hearing that. Traditional luxury. That's how they described it when I had already figured out that my father's brand was losing its edge. But I couldn't let them see how much I was struggling. "I understand," I said, my voice firm, "but I'm not here to preserve my father's old ways. I'm here to take this brand into the future. And that means change." After the meeting, I could see their disbelief written all over their faces. They were questioning whether I could truly pull this off. Would I make the right decisions? Would I be able to turn the empire around? But deep down, I knew this was my shot. If I didn't prove myself now, it would be over before it even started. The next few months were full of lessons, mistakes, and growth. I fired Samuel for underestimating me, and I replaced him with someone I trusted. Slowly, the hotel chain started to gain its footing. But it wasn't until that fateful night in Miami, during a major event, that I truly realized how far I had come. I was at the Callaway grand opening, a lavish gala for our most important clients and partners. Everything was going smoothly, until a key investor pulled out at the last minute, threatening to cancel the deal. Panic spread through the event. Samuel had never been able to handle pressure like this, and the senior staff was paralyzed. Without hesitation, I took charge. I didn't even consult anyone. I just moved. I went to the investor myself, privately, and talked him through his concerns. I showed him the plans I had for the future of the brand, the modern vision I had for the company. By the end of the night, he had signed the deal. And that was when I knew. I was no longer my father's daughter, or the woman who inherited a business. I was the one in charge. As the months passed, I settled deeper into the role. What had once felt like a mountain of pressure started to feel more like a series of manageable challenges, one after another. I was learning, adapting, and slowly earning the respect I needed from the people around me, especially from the staff. However, despite the small victories, there were still moments that brought me back to the reality of what I was trying to do. I still struggled with the weight of my father's legacy. Every time I walked through the hotels, I felt like I was under a microscope, constantly being judged by both the staff and the guests. There were whispers, conversations held behind closed doors. My name, Calloway, carried a heavy burden, one that seemed impossible to escape. One day, as I was walking through the lobby of the Callaway Grand in Miami, one of the bellhops, a young guy named Jake, approached me. His face was tight with tension, and I could tell he had something important to say. "Miss Calloway," he began, his voice uncertain, "there's a guest, he's causing a scene, complaining about everything." I raised an eyebrow. It wasn't unusual for some guests to be difficult, but the way Jake spoke made me think this wasn't just an ordinary complaint. I followed him to the lobby, where a well-dressed man, who looked to be in his late 40s, stood at the reception desk, arguing with the staff. His voice was sharp, cutting through the otherwise serene atmosphere. The staff members were clearly uncomfortable, trying their best to placate him, but he wasn't having it. "I demand to speak with someone in charge," the man barked. This is unacceptable. I paid top dollar for this suite, and I'm being treated like some second-rate guest. Where's the real management? I approached him slowly, trying not to let the frustration show on my face. I had dealt with difficult guests before, but there was something about his tone that grated on me. You're looking at her, I said, calmly but firmly. The man stopped mid-sentence, his eyes narrowing as he took in my appearance. I could see the confusion on his face, and I knew what he was thinking. Who's this woman? You're the one running the place? He asked, clearly unimpressed. I nodded. I am. If there's an issue with your stay, I'm happy to address it. His expression was one of disbelief, like he couldn't process what I was saying. I wasn't sure if it was because of my age or because of the fact that I was a woman, but something about my presence clearly unsettled him. Well, I have a complaint, he started, his voice suddenly more reserved. I requested a king-sized bed, but instead I got 2 queens. And the room service was slow. Do you expect me to pay full price for this? I took a deep breath. This wasn't about the bed. This wasn't about room service. This was about power, his need to feel like he could control the situation, to put me in my place. I wasn't going to let that happen. I'll have the bed swapped out for a king-sized one immediately, I said. As for the room service, I'll personally ensure it's taken care of. But if you're going to stay here, I expect you to treat my staff with respect. His eyes widened, and for a moment I thought he might argue. But then I saw something shift in him. Maybe it was the authority in my voice, or maybe it was because I didn't back down. He hesitated for a long moment, and then, as if realizing there was no room to continue his tirade, he simply nodded. Fine, he muttered, before turning on his heel and walking away. I watched him go, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just that I had resolved the issue, it was that I had stood my ground. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I belonged here, not as my father's daughter, but as the woman who had earned this place. Despite moments like that, I still faced numerous challenges. The resistance from my senior executives continued to be a thorn in my side. They had no respect for my decisions, and it seemed like every move I made was met with disapproval. They didn't believe in my vision for the company. They didn't think I had the chops to bring my father's empire into the modern age. It came to a head one afternoon during a board meeting at the Callaway Plaza in New York. The meeting had been scheduled to discuss a major overhaul to the hotel's brand. I had proposed an update to the hotel's design, an overhaul to make it sleek, modern, and more appealing to younger clientele. I could already feel the tension building in the room as I presented my ideas. Samuel, who was now on the board as one of my father's old associates, leaned forward in his seat, his expression skeptical. Miss Callaway, he said, using my last name like it was a challenge. I don't think you understand the gravity of this decision. Callaway Plaza is known for its traditional luxury. Changing the aesthetics could alienate our most loyal clientele. We can't afford to risk that. I swallowed my frustration, but I knew I had to stand my ground. This wasn't just about making the place look good, it was about evolving with the times. We had to change if we wanted to survive in the competitive luxury hotel market. I understand the concerns, I said, my voice steady. But the world is changing. People's tastes are changing. The younger generation values experiences over ostentation, and that means we need to be ahead of the curve. If we don't modernize, we risk becoming irrelevant. The board members exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. Samuel looked particularly unimpressed. He had been loyal to my father for decades, and I knew he was thinking that I didn't know what I was doing. I couldn't let his doubts shake me. Finally, after a long pause, another board member, Claire, who had been more supportive of my ideas, spoke up. I think Miss Callaway has a point, she said. We need to stay competitive. The market is changing, and we need to adapt. If we continue clinging to the past, we'll fall behind. I looked at Claire, a silent thank you in my eyes. It wasn't much, but it was something. Slowly, one by one, the other members reluctantly nodded. By the end of the meeting, I had gotten approval to move forward with the redesign. It felt like a small victory, but I knew it was just the beginning. There were still so many hurdles ahead. And Samuel, though seemingly quiet in defeat, was far from ready to accept that his influence over the company was slipping. I could feel his eyes on me during the rest of the meeting, and I knew it wasn't over. He wasn't done fighting. And I wasn't done proving that I could do this, even if no one believed in me. The nights got lonelier as the weight of the hotel empire grew heavier. I spent hours poring over contracts, financial reports, and guest feedback. It was never enough. There was always something that needed my attention, and no matter how hard I worked, it felt like I was constantly falling short. At the same time, I couldn't ignore the constant pressure of being the new owner. I couldn't escape the comparisons to my father. Everyone wanted to know if I could live up to the legacy he left behind. And I knew that, for some, I never would. But then there were the moments when I could feel it, the tiny moments of success. The way the staff began to warm up to me. The look of surprise when a guest would hear that I was in charge, and their respect after I'd handled a difficult situation. It was those moments that kept me going. But I knew the biggest challenge was yet to come. My father's estate hadn't been fully settled, and there were still family issues I hadn't addressed. My mother had been quiet about the inheritance, but I knew she wasn't done. There was still the matter of what she wanted out of this entire situation. And I had a feeling the drama wasn't over yet. As I sat in my office late one evening, staring at the portfolio of changes I was implementing across the hotels, I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was on the horizon. The kind of thing that could either make or break everything I had worked so hard to build. But for now, all I could do was wait. Wait for the storm to hit. The days continued to blur into one another, a continuous cycle of meetings, decisions, and increasingly high-stakes situations. I could feel the weight of the empire pressing down on me more and more with each passing day. The hotel chain was doing well, yes, but there was still so much to prove, especially to the people who'd been working for my father for years. The staff, the executives, even the investors, they were all watching me, waiting for me to slip up. I had pushed through the initial challenges, but I had learned that running a luxury hotel chain wasn't just about the glitzy interiors, the fancy branding, or the five-star ratings. It was about relationships, about managing people, making them believe in you, and commanding respect in a world that still expected me to fail. One of the most uncomfortable realities I faced was the tension in the boardroom. Samuel, my father's trusted manager, had become more and more resentful. Every time I made a decision that didn't align with his vision, I could feel the quiet disapproval radiating off him. His eyes would narrow when I spoke, his lips pressed into a tight line whenever I disagreed with him. He was loyal to my father, and that loyalty didn't automatically translate into loyalty to me. In fact, it seemed to breed contempt, because I wasn't my father. One afternoon, as I was reviewing a new proposal for a collaboration with an international brand, I noticed Samuel standing just outside my office door. He had been lingering there for a while, as if waiting for me to acknowledge him. "Miss Calloway," he said, finally entering without knocking. His tone was polite, but I could hear the edge of irritation beneath it. "Yes, Samuel," I responded, looking up from the documents spread across my desk. "I need to talk to you about something important," he said, his eyes narrowing. "I've been with this company for over 2 decades. I've seen it all. I've helped your father build it from the ground up, and I need to know that you're not going to tear it down with these ideas." I raised an eyebrow at him, trying not to let his words rile me. "What exactly are you referring to, Samuel?" "Look," he continued, stepping closer, "this rebranding thing, this push to modernize the hotels, are you sure you know what you're doing? This isn't just about the design. We're talking about the very foundation of what Callaway Hotels is. You don't have the experience to make these kinds of decisions. You're acting like you know better than the people who have been running this business for years. It's reckless." I leaned back in my chair, meeting his gaze without flinching. I knew he didn't respect me, but this was the moment I had to prove to him, and to myself, that I wasn't going to let him bully me. "I understand your concerns, Samuel," I said calmly, keeping my voice even. "But I'm not here to preserve my father's old vision. I'm here to create a new one. If you're not on board with that, then maybe this isn't the place for you." His expression faltered for a moment, and I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He wasn't used to being spoken to like that, especially not by someone who had inherited the role by default rather than merit. But I knew that if I didn't stand my ground now, I would lose every ounce of authority I had left. "I've already made up my mind," I added, my voice firm. "We're moving forward with the changes. Whether you're with me or not." Samuel didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed on me like he was waiting for me to back down. But I didn't. And after a long, tense moment, he finally nodded stiffly and turned to leave. As he walked out of my office, I let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The conversation had gone exactly as I expected, but it still left a sour taste in my mouth. Samuel had been one of my father's closest allies, and if he wasn't on my side now, I knew things were about to get even more complicated. But I couldn't afford to let that stop me. The tension with Samuel was only one part of the larger issue I was facing. Despite my efforts to steer the company toward the future, there was still the looming presence of my mother. She had remained largely silent since my father's death, choosing to stay out of the limelight and leaving me to manage the estate. But I knew it was only a matter of time before she would step in. It wasn't long before I received a call from her, a call I had been anticipating but hadn't wanted to face. "Sarah," she said when I picked up, her voice as cool and detached as ever. "We need to talk." I had never been close to my mother, but I still felt a sense of unease whenever she reached out. She was an actress, and her life had always revolved around the spotlight. But even though her career had long since faded, I knew she had her own interests when it came to my father's legacy. "What is it, Mom?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I think it's time we discuss the inheritance," she said smoothly, her tone laced with an undertone of something I couldn't quite place. "Your father didn't leave me much. He was always so tight with his money. But I think you and I should have a conversation about what's fair. After all, I did raise you, and I had my share of sacrifices for this family." I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I knew exactly what this was about. It was always about money with her. Always. "Mom, everything that's been left is already in my hands," I replied firmly. "You don't need to worry about it." Her laugh on the other end was dry, almost mocking. "Oh, darling, it's never that simple. You're young, and you have no idea what it means to manage a company like this. I think it would be wise for you to listen to me. I've been in the business world for years. You might be in charge now, but you'll need guidance." I clenched my fists. This was exactly what I'd been dreading. She wasn't interested in helping me, she was interested in her own share. "I'll manage just fine, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the anger bubbling up inside me. "I've already made the necessary decisions, and I don't need your guidance on how to run my father's business." Her silence on the other end was more telling than anything she could have said. Finally, she spoke again, her voice cold and calculating. "Well, I suppose we'll see how long that lasts. Just remember, I'm still part of this family, Sarah. You might be the one with the hotels, but you don't have the experience." I wanted to hang up right then and there. But I knew I had to keep my composure. "I'll be fine," I said before ending the conversation. It was clear now. My mother wasn't done. She would find a way to insert herself back into the equation. And if I wasn't careful, she might just try to take everything from me. Despite the growing personal drama, I couldn't afford to lose focus. The hotel chain was doing better, slowly but surely. I had made some key hires, people who had the skills I lacked, and the company was beginning to run more smoothly. Guests were responding positively to the new direction I was taking, and some of the hotels were even earning higher ratings. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental to me. But then, just when things seemed to be settling, something unexpected happened. One of the investors came to me with an urgent request. The deal I had made to modernize the hotels had brought us attention, but it had also attracted the interest of some bigger players, companies much larger than Callaway Hotels. The investor, a man named Richard, told me that another hotel group had expressed interest in buying us out. The offer was tempting, more money than I had ever dreamed of, but at what cost? Would I be selling out my father's legacy for a quick payday? As I sat in my office, staring at the proposal Richard had given me, I knew I had a huge decision to make. Take the money and walk away, or fight to keep the company under my control. The future of Callaway Hotels was now in my hands, but I wasn't sure I could handle the weight of it all. And yet, I couldn't walk away. Not now, not after everything I'd been through. The choice was clear. As the days dragged on, the pressure of the offer from the rival hotel group began to weigh on me. Richard, the investor, was insistent that I seriously consider it. The money involved was staggering, enough to make anyone question their loyalties. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from the executives, pushing me to make a decision. Even my mother, sensing an opportunity, had started texting me with subtle hints about securing my future and doing the smart thing. But in the back of my mind, one thing was clear. Callaway Hotels wasn't just a business to me. It was a part of my identity, and despite all the challenges, I had started to make it my own. I had worked too hard, fought too many battles, to just let it slip away now. The final straw came one late evening. I was sitting in my office at the Callaway Plaza Hotel, staring at the offer letter from the rival company once again. I had made up my mind, no deal. But then, as I looked at the figure on the paper, something else caught my attention. It wasn't just the money or the property value. It was a clause in the fine print that hinted at something far more insidious. The rival hotel group didn't just want the company, they wanted to dismantle it. Their plan was to take the most profitable parts of Callaway Hotels, absorb the brand, and cut everything else loose. They had no intention of keeping the legacy intact. My father's hard work, his dreams, would be wiped out in one swift move. I was done being the passive heir. I wasn't going to let some corporate shark strip the company of its soul just for a profit. But I also knew I couldn't take them on directly without the proper leverage. That's when I decided it was time for a little payback. Samuel, who had been a constant thorn in my side, had been undermining me for months. His passive-aggressive comments in meetings, his quiet sabotage of my ideas, it had all led up to this point. Samuel was one of the primary architects of my father's old-school management style, and I knew if I wanted to break free of the past, I had to get rid of him. But I couldn't just fire him. I had to make him understand the consequences of underestimating me. I started gathering information, quietly, without raising any suspicion. Samuel had always been protective of the company's operations, but I knew there were areas where he had been skimming profits for years. His financial dealings were shady, at best, and his manipulation of company funds wasn't as well hidden as he thought. I waited for the right moment. Then, I used everything I had on him. A few discreet conversations with some old employees, a couple of phone calls to legal contacts, and I had enough material to expose Samuel for what he truly was. A man who had been siphoning money off the company for his own benefit. The next board meeting, I walked in with the papers in hand. The board members, including Samuel, were gathered around the table. I sat down, placed the file in front of me, and cleared my throat. "Before we discuss the recent offer," I said, my voice calm, "I think it's time we address a few discrepancies within the company." I slid the folder across the table, letting it land in front of Samuel. His face went pale as he stared at the documents in front of him, his hands shaking slightly. The room fell into an eerie silence. "I think it's time we talk about where some of the profits have been going, don't you?" I said, watching him squirm. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Samuel, who had always been the one pulling the strings behind the scenes, suddenly found himself cornered. He tried to regain his composure, but it was clear that the walls were closing in around him. "I don't know what you're talking about," Samuel stammered, his voice unsteady. "Don't play dumb, Samuel," I replied coolly. "I have all the records. Personal funds being funneled into offshore accounts, unauthorized bonuses, and cash withdrawals. You've been stealing from the company for years." The board members gasped, some of them looking at Samuel with shock, others with outright disdain. Samuel opened his mouth to argue, but the damage was already done. I had set the trap, and he had walked right into it. "I've been patient with you," I continued, my eyes never leaving Samuel's. "But I won't stand for this anymore. Your days here are done." I could see the realization hit Samuel like a ton of bricks. He looked around the table, hoping someone would speak up, but no one did. The board was on my side now. They had seen the truth. "You're fired, Samuel," I said, my voice unwavering. "And I'll make sure the authorities are notified. You'll have to answer for what you've done." Samuel's face turned bright red, his eyes wild with panic. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "This isn't over, Sarah. You'll regret this," he spat, but there was no conviction in his voice. "You've already lost," I said quietly, watching him storm out of the room. "It's over." With Samuel out of the picture, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. But the real victory came soon after. The board, seeing the direction I was taking, rallied behind me. They saw that I wasn't just the daughter of Victor Callaway. I was capable, driven, and willing to fight for the future of the company. The rival hotel group, sensing weakness with Samuel's exposure, backed off. The offer I had been considering was no longer on the table. Instead of offering me a buyout, they began negotiating a potential partnership, a far more lucrative deal than I had imagined. With the backing of my board and my newly earned respect, I struck a deal that kept Callaway Hotels independent, with a new infusion of capital and a commitment to my vision for modernization. But that wasn't the only payback I had in mind. My mother, who had been quietly watching from the sidelines, had finally reached out to demand her share of the inheritance. She was expecting to take a slice of my hard-earned success, as always. But this time, I had a different plan. I made it clear that the company was mine, and mine alone. I wasn't going to split the profits or allow her to have a hand in any of the future decisions. She could have her share of the estate, but she would never have control of the business. Her dreams of using my inheritance as her own stepping stone had come to an end. "You've been absent all this time, Mom," I said calmly over the phone, "and I've had to fight for everything. If you think you can waltz back into my life and take a piece of what I've built, you're mistaken." There was silence on the other end. I could almost hear her disbelief. "You can take your money," I added, "but this company is mine, and you're not getting a single thing more than what's rightfully yours." I didn't expect her to thank me, but I wasn't looking for gratitude. What I wanted was control, and I had it now. The months that followed were a whirlwind of growth, decisions, and constant evolution. Callaway Hotels transformed into a brand that was no longer shackled by the past. We embraced modern design, we introduced new services for younger clientele, and the business thrived in ways I never imagined. I had done it. I had fought against the odds, the resistance, and even my own family to make something my father had built into something of my own. Callaway Hotels was now a brand that stood for innovation, luxury, and forward-thinking, all thanks to my leadership. Looking back, I realized that this journey had been about so much more than just a business. It had been about proving to everyone, and to myself, that I was more than just an heir. I was the one in charge now. And those who underestimated me, well, they learned that revenge wasn't about cruelty or drama, it was about resilience. And in the end, it was my resilience that won.